All right. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Crystal Queer's QA podcast, our second episode. We're back again, and today we're exploring LGBTQIA history and a timeline. My name is Andrew.
I'm Jeanette.
And we started this podcast because we wanted to have some real life conversations that kind of broke down the LGBTQIA subject into brief segments where we could start with easier stuff and then get into some more complicated stuff over time and in the future.
And our mission is to help people see that even though gender and sexuality may be complicated to understand at times, we can have open conversations and learn with and from each other.
So today we're going to continue to discuss a very brief overview of some of the topics that we believe are important to note for this Pride Month. This week we are focusing on the history of some of the important moments in the United States LGBTQIA history, and we will be offering a timeline of events that we feel are some of the crucial pieces in telling the story of Pride and why we celebrate Pride.
A lot of conversations I've had with people, folks wonder why Pride is such a big deal still. The short answer to this question is that Pride matters because it's about honoring the lived experiences, the struggles, barriers that have been overcome in the fight for equality. In the US, we don't teach the history of Pride in schools, so most people don't know about Pride unless it's a significant part of your world somehow.
Pride isn't just about dancing around in rainbow capes and rainbow flags. Pride is about honoring the very real and difficult struggle for equality that is historical but also still ongoing. It's also about celebrating being your true self and living your true life openly, loud and proud.
Yeah. And to fully understand the answer to why Pride is important, you need to understand a bit of the history surrounding the LGBT plus subject movement. And that's why we're talking about that history and timeline today.
Right. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the first sort of resource that we had started using for this history and timeline. We chose about 10 significant points in history years that we thought were important to note today. But this is a resource that's huge. It's got a lot of dates, I believe about 59, maybe 60 dates where significant things happened for musicians, for poets, for equal rights activists and government stuff. So we're going to take all of those things into account, but you can find more information about this timeline from the GSLEN website. That stands for Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. They have a very comprehensive, easy to understand list there. So our first date that we chose to focus on was starting in 1779 from Thomas Jefferson, who had revised the Virginia law to make sodomy committed by men or women punishable instead of death. Now they get mutilation. So that was the switch that was made in 1779.
Great deal. Oh man. 1917. This was taken from the UC San Diego LGBTQ History and Government Documents, timeline of documents. The Immigration Act of 1917, which was used to exclude homosexuals from immigration to the United States based on the status of persons of constitutional psychopathic inferiority. One of the things that I found interesting as Andrew and I have worked on creating this episode is how many other kind of subject areas were used to limit LGBT folks historically, and immigration is one of those. And I'm not up on immigration things today and its relationship with LGBT folks, so maybe some of you out there listening can speak to that. But it was just interesting to me that these different issues were pulled in and used against LGBT folks. So in so many different ways.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And we have a couple of those further on in this timeline as well. So we'll be able to speak more to that. Mm-hmm. So taken from that same UC San Diego website, we have the first Supreme Court case that dealt with homosexuality and free speech. This was in 1958, and the Supreme Court case was One Incorporated versus Olson. So we are going to provide the hyperlink to this resource so that you can go and read further into that if you so choose. But that was, sort of a case that's, I feel, spoke for itself with dealing with homosexuality and free speech.
In 1974, the Equality Act passed on May 14th by the US Government House of Representatives, and that prohibits discrimination based on sex, marital status, sexual orientation, and national origin. The president at that time was Gerald Ford. Andrew and I were talking about this earlier, and we thought, both of us kind of felt like we thought the Equality Act happened later than it actually did, 1974. And so, that made me think of how a lot of us think that things are just fine and better than they used to be. And then, things happen, and all of a sudden we realize things are not as good as we think they are. And that's our privilege showing, is that we can go through life and think things are better now, because we're not being directly affected by that. And we're not part of that, the different worlds, the different experiences. And so, it's just really important for us to know that even if we're not personally affected by these different things, there's still stuff happening. And things aren't necessarily better just yet. So
Yeah.
they'll have a long ways to go. 1974 is the Equality Act. Look how far, how much needs to be changed still.
Totally. Yeah. And how much our social status or social goings on really affect how much our privilege is able to be flexed and ebb and flow. And so that brings us sort of to the next date, which is a really notable date, 1982, which is the date that nearly 800 people are affected with what was first called GRID, which is an acronym for Gay-Related Immunodeficiency Disorder. And that name was later changed before the end of that year to be what we now know as AIDS. So it was the first sort of lack of support given from what I believe in my reading is to have been from the government to not be able to allocate resources to be able to support these gay men who were suffering very, disproportionately to the rest of the population with this disorder. So, it's definitely it's hasn't been so long that we've had all of these big strides. It's pretty much in our recent history.
In our lifetime.
Yeah.
The next one is of the year 1989. Billy Tipton, you might know, was a famous male jazz musician who died in 1989. And as a result of his death, it became public knowledge that Tipton was assigned female at birth, but lived and identified as male for most of his life. And that one kind of gives me chills every time I read through it. Just bittersweet a bit.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely the first, or probably one of the first documented transgender individuals who has been able to pass, very significantly, very easily for their whole lifetime. But, as we had been talking about previously, it's sort of unfortunate that now this is the headline that lives in history. And I'm sure that he was somebody who had much more to offer and much more to say, rather than be known by his identity. I would love to listen to some of his music maybe and see, what he had to offer, instead of just being maybe somebody who either identified as trans or didn't really know what it was, but just lived his true self.
Yeah. We just do that so much in society, right? We like to put each other in nice, neat little boxes and label each other to supposedly better understand each other, but it really just prevents us from understanding each other at all when we do that. And so by, only focusing on his gender, it prevents us from seeing the amazing, who was this person, what did he accomplish, and the music that he made. So, then we talk about him as far as in regards to his gender rather than, who he really was. We miss out on a lot. And we do that in our daily lives with a lot of things, whether it's disabilities or body image stuff, gender.
Yeah. So our next 1989, we've got 2 points from this year. Notably, Denmark becomes the first country in the world to legally recognize same-sex unions after passing a bill that was legalizing registered partnerships. And this bill was voted on with 74 majority and 47 opposing, which I think is awesome. Also noted that George H.W. Bush was president in the United States in this year. So food for thought on that one.
Yeah. 1 year later, in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act added language that changed the terms to no longer include the then phrase transvestites. Now the correct word is transgender. And this one, Andrew and I were talking about a couple of things, a couple of big deals came out of this, acknowledging that your gender is not a disability just because it's not like mainstream or straight or whatever. So that's a pretty big deal. And then the second part of that being that, we kind of thought was huge was just that word change. And transvestites is negative connotation to the word, labeling people. And so when we change that to transgender, that really shifts the conversation when we shift that label and makes it a more positive thing. Two really big things.
Yeah, definitely. Big stuff happening in the 1990s. So we're going to jump quite a few years out to 2015, which another Supreme Court case that rules that states are constitutionally required to issue a marriage license on same-sex couples, which effectively legalized marriage equality in all 50 states. So that was only 6 years ago. So we're super happy to have that. It's been a little hairy here and there with making sure that stays in effect. But yeah, pretty big things happened in 2015. Love to see it.
Yeah. And then the last one that we're going to address on the timeline today is 2016. And that will lead us into our the second part of our podcast on the topic. So 2016, President Obama dedicated the Stonewall National Monument in Greenwich Village, Lower Manhattan, as the first U.S. national monument to honor the LGBTQIA rights movement.
Yeah.
And that's huge. I mean, it's crazy that it took so long for something like that to happen. Not crazy considering the reality of how these things go, like we were talking about earlier. But when leaders in our communities at all levels, when leaders acknowledge their allyship publicly and take action to show that allyship in really significant ways like this, that really shifts the conversation forward.
Mm-hmm.
and allows folks to feel more seen and valued. So those of you out there listening who are leaders in your communities, think about, as you want to become better allies, how can you use your role as leaders in the community to help affect change?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. One thing I did want to note too on the end of this list is that there are more historical events that are part of the LGBTQ government documents, the timeline of documents that go all the way, up until 2021. So it's a very live and aware with the times document. So there are more dates in the future that sort of highlight the different parties who have been able to have majorities, and so it's really interesting to be able to see those dates that are closer to our present day timeline. So with that being said, we're going to move over into our final sort of segment that focuses on the first, what some would call the first Pride, which is Stonewall. Stonewall was very important in the history of the LGBTQIA community. So we're going to be pulling from the Stonewall 50th Anniversary Consortium. And yeah, so you may or may not have heard of the name Stonewall before listening to this episode. So we would like to explain a bit about what it is and why it's so important still today.
Yeah, so when people refer to Stonewall, they're referring to this famous riot that occurred on June 28th, 1969, between the LGBTQ plus community and the New York City Police Department. The riots were based around Stonewall Inn, which was owned by, and I love saying this name, mafioso Fat Tony Loria. And it was a private gay club in Greenwich Village in New York City, opened in 1967.
So during this time period, to give a little bit of background information, the New York State Liquor Authority had outlawed serving of alcohol in disorderly establishments, which were more typically gay bars and clubs. Surprise, surprise. But basically, this prevented the LGBT plus community and those people who were at those places from being served any alcohol. So any gay bars or clubs had to operate as private clubs in order to circumvent these liquor laws of the time.
Yeah, and then like many other underground establishments in the early 1900s, prohibition, the outlawing of alcohol, played a significant role in police raids or bars or clubs that were known to have been queer friendly, during this time period that we're talking about, 60s. So law enforcement regulated liquor license, and certain officers would have relationships with these club owners, where in exchange for a bribe, they would tip off the club owners to police raids, and that would prevent anything bad happening to the patrons and the club. So owners would receive this tip from an officer. The owners would throw the lights on, and patrons would pose as if they were passing a straight, basically preventing them from being arrested and things. So, but on the night of June 28th at the Stonewall Inn, this was not the case, and Stonewall Inn was raided, and that began the Stonewall Riots.
Right. So the riots started in the wee morning hours of June 28th, 1969. To this date, I believe there's no real account about who started it, how it, became such a big tussle. People will say what they want, so I will leave that up to your own personal opinion on how that started. But for this account, what I have read is that the overall eyewitness account was that on the first night there was 500 to about 600 people who were there. The second night reached about 2,000, so that was the largest amount of people present in the area for the full 6 days. The third and fourth nights were relatively quiet, not enough to warrant, a count being made. And the sixth and final night brought between 500 to 1,000 people in the area to be able to protest. A very notable point about these Stonewall riots is that there were absolutely no fatalities for the entire 6 days. I thought that was really cool. Especially with recently in the last couple of years, so much of an eye being on riots and looting and stuff like that, and how it can be so dangerous and so awful. But this is a prime example of people's voices being heard and nobody needing to be killed.
So Stonewall is so significant because it is considered to be the historical event that has led to LGBT plus liberation and the modern fight for LGBT plus equal rights in the United States. So very, very significant event.
Mm-hmm. Pride is the commemoration of Stonewall, a way to remember and honor those who have fought so hard to achieve the rights LGBTQIA folks currently hold. Pride is also a celebration of freedom to show pride and a privilege to be who we are without shame, and a way to thank those who blazed that trail before us. So another note that we would like to make is that yesterday, which was June 12th, was the 5-year anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting, in which I believe about 49 people were killed from somebody who was, not able to really, there's a whole thing. But this acts, sort of as the kindling for the continuation of equal rights, and for that movement, because every year there's an anniversary that goes by. So keeps us
Yeah.
focused.
Again, that was only 5 years ago. We often, those of us who are privileged to not be biased against for our gender and sexuality, we tend, and we think, oh, things are going pretty good. Most people are like, love is love, and there's not a lot of bad stuff happening anymore. Why do people think they need to celebrate Pride still? Or that's the older generation that kind of felt that way, and I think our generation is better at that, and probably they're right to a degree, but it's not just older generations, it's into the fabric of our culture, and we have to keep fighting to change that, because the shooter at the Pulse nightclub was 29 years old. 29, and so we just have these ideas that things are different than the reality, and it's really important to kind of ground ourselves in the reality so that we can do the good work that needs to be done still, and everyone is playing a role in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just even if it's just having conversations in your daily lives. So.
Yep.
So by no means are we experts on this subject, the subject of history of the LGBT subject and pride. We are not experts, but we are speaking from some research and resources that we've used to help us articulate things as accurately as possible.
If you have any comments or questions about this episode or about this podcast, feel free to email us and we'll do our best to answer. You can email me at crystalqueerqa@gmail.com, and you can reach Jeanette at socialtinkeringvt@gmail.com. Again, we are not experts and we are not trained historians. We're a couple of people with different lived experiences trying to help people understand each other better. We're doing this project while trying to show the utmost respect to where everyone is at in the learning process. We expect viewers to be respectful in return, and if you are not, your comments will be deleted and you will be blocked.
So we want to thank you for being here with us to explore and learn about the LGBTQIA experience. We will have 2 more episodes in this Pride mini-series during the month of June that will be published each of the next 2 weeks of June. The next episode will come out around Father's Day, and I'm very excited about this one because every time it gives me chills. This episode that's coming up next will feature Andrew and his father speaking about their lived experience learning together as Andrew came out and transitioned.
Yeah.
Really excited to hear that conversation.
Yeah, there will be lots of good information, and hopefully it will be helpful for everybody. But we're so excited to be able to be creating this as a resource. Jeanette and I are revitalized every time we get to be able to record and post this for you all, and to be able to share it with everybody. So in an effort to continue improving your experience and to continue giving us support as we move through this, we would like to ask your a question about the content. So please let us know if you would like to see more videos that highlight our past research and follow more of a, let's say, a scripted format, sort of like what we've been doing. Or if you would rather us choose a topic and focus on a more free-flowing and conversational setup. So feel free to leave a comment below on that question. Again, I'm Andrew Richardson. I'm the founder of Crystal Queer QA. And I truly appreciate you all taking the time and effort to listen with us today and to show your support of the LGBTQIA community.
I'm Jeanette Langston, founder of Social Tinkering, a Human Connection Project. I am so happy to be here partnering with Andrew and with Crystal Queer QA to help people better understand each other in order to build connections that will grow happiness and belonging.
Many of us, particularly youth and young adults, really need our support in many aspects of their lives. And watching these episodes, sharing them with your friends and your family can be a really easy way for you to show your support to us this Pride Month. Please smash that like and subscribe button and share Crystal Queer, our YouTube channel, with your friends. And you can also find us on Facebook as well. So your support and your views are so much appreciated, and what keeps us coming back and what keeps us being able to make these things happen for you all. So thank you so much for listening, and enjoy your Pride Month. See you later.
Mhm.